Hello everybody. I wanted to make a video talking about my experience with intergenerational trauma, um, healing and overcoming patterns and cycles, unhealthy patterns and cycles. Um, so briefly, I'm going to mention my experience in childhood and during my teenage years when it comes to intergenerational trauma in my family. Um, Honestly, I really questioned myself if recording this video was a good idea because um, I prefer to keep things private, but I think that it may be helpful or useful for someone out there if they listen to my experience and how I've been able to deal with all of these things. So here you have me recording this. Well, since I was a kid, I remember that it was very normal for my family, to first of all be in a scarcity mindset, right? When it comes to money and wealth and material possessions, and this has been running, through the family, since generations ago. It comes from even before my parents and before my grandma. I come from a family that mostly hasn't have the means, the economical means to, I think it's economic, right? Economic means to have a decent life without worries or when it comes to material stability. My grandma had a really difficult life when it came to that, right? Her mother had to take care of so many children, and her husband died when their children were young, and so she had to take care of them all, right? And it was very difficult for them, to be able to overcome all these situations, growing up in these circumstances. Of course, left them with some big trauma, and since they had to focus on survival, right, and on the material aspects of living. They didn't really have much time to focus on developing psychological or emotional strength, or intellectual strength even, because of course they were in survival mode. So they perpetuated a lot of unhealthy, behavior, and left so many wounds unhealed that were passed down to my parents and then to me and to my siblings. So, of course, scarcity mindset is one part of the equation, right? This very unhealthy relationship to money, like always expecting that it's never going to be enough, that you need something else to be, to have fulfillment, or that it's never enough, that you always need more, and that you always need more, and that you always need more, right? And it's there's never enough money. It's just like, of course, it's when it comes down to it, to the actual facts, when it came to my own experience, or with the experience of my family, right, I noticed this scarcity mindset was perpetuated for several reasons. Right, one of it was the unhealed emotional and psychological, of course, constraints they had. My parents, my grandma. and another part of it was more of the like more related to the administration of the money itself, right? Which again, it's still related to the nervous system and the psychology, behind wealth that some people carry, Um, so, they would just assume that there was never going to be enough money, that they were not going to be able to, have a more prosperous life, more abundant life, and they just settled for what for for the minimum, for the bare minimum, just to be able to survive. They didn't really, pursue anything further, anything beyond that. Actually, it's just like there's this idea which is a very Mexican, mindset about, like the parents, like the kids taking care of the parents and, living with them even in the same house and paying for them and all of that. So, in my family there was this perpetuated idea, that you had to take care of your parents, and that eventually when they grew older, you had to pay for them, and you had to give them a home. And instead of actually the parents, taking responsibility for planning their future, for planning their lives, for actually, like developing, skills to, administration skills, and, like planning and just all things related to it, right? Instead of doing that, and instead of taking responsibility for their future, and, how their actions and their behavior directly influence that, the quality of their lives in their future, not only in the present moment, but in their future. Instead of doing that, they just kind of settled for what they had, for the minimum. They assumed that their kids were going to, just pay for them when they would get, as older people, when they would get older, that they assumed, or they just, they kind of hinted through comments, that they expected me and my siblings to just pay for them, instead of actually owning to their shit and owning to their behavior and owning to their decisions. And like I said, they just settled for how they thought things were, or how they thought things needed to happen. And like, instead of breaking the cycles, they continued the same thing, that has been repeating, since generations before them. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, right, they like I said, it was just not, it wasn't just like psychological or intellectual. It also came down to the practical aspect of things, right? Because they would overspend money on things they didn't need. They would overspend money on like material things that were not necessary, that weren't required, that they didn't really need. And they would also overspend money on, things such as alcohol, which again was not a really great thing. Alcohol and cigarettes. I do smoke as well, right? So this is not against smokers or drinkers, but I'm referring to, the unhealthy, when it comes to an unhealthy habit, not only to your health, but also unhealthy for your finances, right? Because they would just overspend the money they didn't have, they already assumed they didn't have enough money, and the little money they had, they would just misuse it, right, on, on excessive buying of things that were just not needed, not required. So I also, have to take in consideration here that there's also an addiction element to this. So it's more complex than just what I'm saying, right? I'm saying it as if it's just very easy to, if it's a thing that's very easy to solve or to get through, but it isn't. I'm aware that, it's a very complex, issue, that interconnects with other issues, and behavior. Anyway, So they were like this. Also, at home, besides money, they also had an issue with just settling down for having mediocre lives. Like, I don't know how else to put it, right? They were the kind of people that just settled to have regular jobs. They didn't try to, like grow professionally. Well, my stepfather and my grandma did. Well, actually, my stepfather did. Um, but he got to a point where he just didn't continue growing from where he was, and mostly my mom and my grandma, would just like my grandma is more of a hard worker, and that's really great about her, but she wasn't really good, using the money. So it was like, it was like water in her hands, you know. And my mother she would just settle, right? She wouldn't really try to grow professionally, and there have been chunks of time, like big chunks of time, where she hasn't worked, and she hasn't done anything like work related or professionally related. She has just stayed home, and perhaps it would have been great if she, was, you know, if her intentions were to actually, take care of her children and of the house and all of those things. But unfortunately, she wasn't. She wasn't in the right mindset. So she would focus more on herself, and um, she tended to be a very, um, how do you say? She tended to be a very. She didn't do much. She didn't do much. Um, that's what I'm gonna say. So yeah, she would keep herself like stuck in activity, right? And so instead of the money flowing, responsibly, like there were like several lessons that were not being learned by any of them. They would limit themselves, they would limit their income, they would limit their own capabilities, they would limit their how do you say, their ambition. They were not ambitious. Actually, when I was younger, I remember that I used to. I mean, I still I have a ton of things that I'm working on and that I still want to work on in the future. When the opportunity comes, and I'm always doing stuff, right? I'm interested in doing all kinds of stuff. I'm a very curious person, and so I like to be learning constantly, and just applying these new abilities that I acquire. And develop projects and so on, right? Um, but they weren't like that. Whenever I remember when I was a kid, and I would like to talk to them about my dreams and my wishes and what I expected to have or to develop or to accomplish in my life. They would be very discouraging with me. They would be very well, yeah, discouraging is the word. Um, they would be sometimes very mean about it, and sometimes a little disrespectful. They would just, they would project onto me, just because they didn't follow their dreams, or they didn't follow their. I don't even know if they had any dreams. I don't even know if they actually, at some point, they had any kind of ambition. But when it came to my own ambitions, they would be very discouraging about them. Um, tough, tough. They were really, really, really tough about it when I was young. It was really hard for me to be able to kind of overcome that, because I mean, they would be psychologically and emotionally abusive with us. Like my mom, more than anything, she has covert narcissistic tendencies, I don't know if she's actually a narcissist, like that could be diagnosed, but she had some tendencies, right? And well, in general, you know, like my family was very, I don't know if they still are, I haven't talked to them in months, but they still are very, they were still very manipulative, right? They were be psychological and emotionally manipulative. So we would be complacent with each other. It was just like this very sick dynamic, that they would enforce that, and they would also repeat that, right? It's just like it's just like they were being well, yeah, it was like they were perpetuating those kinds of dynamics, right? Like they would be manipulative, but at some points they would also be the victim, right? And it was just this very weird, very sick kind of dynamic that existed there at home, right, with my parents and with my grandma and with my siblings. Um, so it wasn't cool. It wasn't cool. um, but yeah, so like I said, I had to do uh, there was really no sense of stability. That's what I'm going to say. There was no sense of economic stability. There was no sense of financial stability, right? There was no sense of material stability in any sense. There was no sense of psychological stability, emotional stability. There was just no stability. I grew up in a house where like you know like I said, manipulation was a norm, and it was a way of, it was just how you would get away with things, and instead of you actually solving your problems and owning to your own shit, and, like taking responsibility, taking accountability, and correcting, your behavior to, match better outcomes, they would just completely disregard it. They would just completely ignore it. They would just not take any kind of accountability for their consequences, for the consequences of their actions. And instead they would just try to, blame others, or, you know, just be manipulative so others could, like, save them from whatever issue they were encountering at the time. Um, like I said, the worst thing is that, even like, for example, whenever I tried to help in some way, right, like I would provide my help, and instead of them learning about it, they would just continue repeating the same patterns. It's just like me helping them wasn't actually helping them, because they weren't learning. They weren't realizing. Well, I don't know if they were realizing or not, but they weren't learning, and they weren't applying, what they were supposed to be applying when it comes to a better decision making. And so they would only take from me, literally, like, it kind of hurts me saying this, but they were like parasites, and they would not own to their own shit. They would not own to their own crap, and instead they would make me feel bad whenever I didn't want to help. Whenever I didn't want to help, like I said, help, because it wasn't about help. It was just manipulation, So they wouldn't own to their own, to the consequences of their own, their own karma, really. um, so of course this left me with a ton of issues, to solve, because all of those projections, and all of that, those dynamics, really affected me, since I was a kid, of course. I carried a lot of it. I really did my best to not replicate those behaviors. Since I was a kid, I noticed, that a lot of it wasn't okay, that a lot of it had to be corrected, and I did my best to avoid not replicating the same patterns. But of course, subconsciously, I did repeat many of the same patterns, and I've been working on that. And actually now I feel, I've come to a point in my life where I don't feel like I need to do that as much as I used to before. Like, there's always things to work on, but I don't worry about these things anymore in my life. I have other things that I worry about nowadays. Um, but yeah, right. They projected onto me a ton of things that I had to just deal by myself, right? Because clearly they weren't able to help, right? They were the ones like perpetuating this. So I had to find a way to get through. So this, eventually affected me in my life in many aspects. For example, I became well, I started using psychoactive substances, which is I'm trying to say that I have used drugs, right? I just prefer the phrase psychoactive substances. It carries less, like, you know, less weight, less prejudice. But anyway, so I tried psychoactive substances, and actually, I'm gonna say it was one of those things that actually helped me a ton. It's kind of crazy to say, even when I talk to other people, that I say just like drugs actually helped me overcome so many, like patterns and so many like thought cycles and so many things, so much unhealed trauma. Drugs helped me a lot, like specifically I used cannabis, I used LSD, eventually I used psilocybin and a few things here and there. But these ones are like the ones I relied the most on. Also, I used methylphenidate. That one was prescribed because of issues that I was encountering because of I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism level 1 a couple of years ago, and so I was going through a really rough patch, and so I was prescribed with methylphenidate, and it also helped me a ton. It did for a while. I don't use it anymore really, but it was very helpful when I needed it because well, I'm getting too ahead of myself. Well, all these intergenerational trauma, caused me a lot of health issues when it came to my actual physical health. Uh, you know, I had issues with severe depression. I no longer have depression, but still, it was I carried depression for a while. Since I was a kid, like until relatively recent. Maybe a few years ago. Um, I used to have issues with like very life debilitating anxiety, with insomnia. That's how you pronounce it. Insomnia. Sorry, English is not my first language. Um, and well, of course, I developed other unhealthy, like mechanisms when it came to my relationship with others, right? With other people in general, with my social skills. It damaged my social skills a lot. I remember that sometimes, during some points of my life, people just wouldn't like me, and eventually I realized that it was because I was repeating like the same unhealthy patterns that I was seeing at home, and eventually I realized that people don't like those things, right? Because it's fucked up. It's fucked up. So I had to learn, to see, and to really pay attention to my behavior and my thoughts, right? But yeah, I encountered issues when it came to that. I mean, besides that, I also had to deal with other personal difficulties when it came to my self-esteem, with me being gay, and with my neurodivergency, which I didn't understand when I was younger. It was clear to me that I was different, and it was clear to me that I have difficulties that other people didn't have, but I wouldn't get it. I wouldn't understand why. I didn't understand why until a couple of years ago. So I had to deal with my own stuff, and at the same time I had to deal with my family's projections onto me, with their own insecurities and their own trauma. So it was just like very difficult to have to get through so much stuff, not only my stuff, but also like stuff that other people were carrying, and not only my parents or my family, like even other people at work, or even in the street, in public places, at school, like people. I mean, this is not exclusive to me, but I've noticed that uh, it's a it's a recurring theme in my life. Like people just enjoy projecting themselves onto me, right? Constantly. And it's very exhausting, honestly, you guys. It's very exhausting to have a ton of people. I'm not gonna say everybody because not everybody projects onto me, but most people do, and it's not an exaggeration, dude. I'm a very socially alienated person, just exactly because of these kinds of things, right? Because people tend to project themselves onto me, and it's just hard for me to have like genuine connections and genuine, to develop a genuine relationship with someone who's constantly projecting onto me. Like there's a lot of unhealed people out there. Um, but anyway, um, so I had to deal with a lot of issues, right? I had to deal with a lot of crap from other people besides my own stuff, my own, like, as an individual, my uh, uh, well, yeah, and so, okay, going back a little bit to the substance use, right? So I would use that. I would also like be a heavy smoker. Well, sometimes I stop smoking for periods of time and I just don't smoke at all, right? But more than anything in the past, I remember there used to be moments where, like, like periods, where I would just smoke a ton. I would just smoke like a pack of cigarettes each day, right? And so imagine that. Sometimes I would also use alcohol. Alcohol has never been one of my favorites, or it hasn't been my preferred substance to use. Honestly, I just don't. But there were moments in time where I also relied heavily on alcohol. So alcohol hasn't been really that good. Tobacco, like cigarettes, have been somewhat helpful sometimes during some seasons of my life. They have been really helpful. They help me with my energy management, as stimulants. But there also have been moments where, uh, you know, my smoking habit has, just has become a problem. Um, Nowadays, I honestly, I'm not struggling too much with it anymore, but I used to. Um, Cannabis, I currently don't really, do cannabis often. I mean, sporadically just. But there was a period of my life where I also, abused of cannabis. And it was making me miserable, because it's just like I would use it for like to escape, like to escape my reality, to escape, to just to feel something different. Like I was having to deal with so much stuff that I just wanted to be somewhere else or feel something else. And so I would abuse cannabis. And as fun as it can be, or even helpful in different contexts, because I've used it in non-recreational contexts, and it can be useful. But when you abuse it and you don't have a mindful consumption of it or any other substance, right? It can become a problem. And so, yeah, I had to deal with those, with with substance abuse at some points of my life. LSD and psilocybin were actually the most helpful. I mean, if you know anything about it or you have read about it, their potential they have you know, uh, for psychological treatments. It's quite amazing. I also happen to use MDMA. It's the substance I have used the least, but it was very helpful too. It helped me process, like a lot of emotions that I hadn't worked through. Um, LSD helped me to notice patterns that I, you know, hadn't noticed until that point, and psilocybin helped me integrating a lot of, the teachings and the lessons. Well, yeah, lessons that I encountered throughout my life, and it helped me, see. Psilocybin has helped me to see things through totally different lenses. It has changed the way I perceive life and existence itself, right? So my relationship with substances has been complex. Substances have been useful in so many occasions, but also there have been times where they have become a real issue. You know, Nowadays I'm not having I'm not having really issues when it comes to substance use. I'm not abusing of anything right now, or particularly. I haven't, for a while. I I was able to come to a place where I can be more responsible for my use and more deliberate, more intentional. And so I still use substances once in a while for uh, less for recreational purposes, more for spiritual reasons. But yeah, I mean, they're powerful in the right hands. Uh, I like to see substances as any other tools, right? Like, probably you've heard this very common analogy between a knife, and whatever else. Like, a knife is not bad in itself, but people can use it for good things, and other people can use it for bad things. The same tool. So drugs are the same. Like, they can be used in a positive way, but they can also be used in a negative way. So the context is very important. The mindset of the person taking the substance is very important. The substance being taken is very important, because not everything is the same, and not everything has the same, neurological, uh, you know, qualities to it, or the neurological effects, I should say. Um, so yeah, it's a very complex topic, but I think that, with responsible use, you can get a lot of benefit out of it. Just it's not for everybody. That I have clear. It's not for everybody, and not everybody should try it if they don't feel compelled to do it. It shouldn't be used for to escape one's reality. It's just not the way to go. Um, but anyway, right? So I've also had to deal with suicidal thoughts since I was a kid. I remember having suicidal thoughts since I was very young, and these thoughts have been, like, coming and going, and still currently in my life they still come and go sometimes. I don't have. I no longer go through depression or anxiety the way I used to. I've been able to get through that and to heal those aspects of my psyche. But, I guess that sometimes life is too overwhelming, and I have to deal with so much stuff simultaneously, and sometimes it gets really hard and it gets really tough. And so, it's just like I have to fight against these thoughts, uh, because I don't want to do it. It's just like, it's something I don't want to do. I don't want to commit suicide, but it's like these thoughts keep appearing, and they keep coming up. You know. I mean, they still show up sometimes, but like I said, it's not something I want to do. It's not something I want to act on. I've kind of had to develop an internal mechanism to kind of disregard them as much as I can. To, first of all, I don't ignore my emotions, and I don't ignore, any of it. I pay attention to it. I reflect, and I allow for things to, you know, come up to the surface. But I don't allow for those thoughts to materialize into harmful actions or harmful behavior. Um, so I keep it at bay. But yeah, I guess it's something that I had to learn to live with, right? I mean, these kinds of thoughts haven't always been there. Like, what do I mean? Um, they aren't there all day, every day. They aren't there 24/7 or anything like that. You know, it was something that was very prominent when I was younger and when I was a teenager and maybe during like my first years as an adult. It was an issue. But lately, you know, these last years of my life, it hasn't become such a problem anymore. Um, it doesn't have so much power over me anymore. I have been able to deal with that aspect of my life, so I don't really worry about it. But yes, it can be very overwhelming and it can be very exhausting when it happens. You know, when I'm encountering um, uh, you know, a season of my life where things get really tough and get really overwhelming. It can be a challenge, but it's not impossible. I've been I've been able to get through it, right? Um, and so, well, this is more or less, you know, how this intergenerational trauma has affected me. Like I said, you know, I would also repeat a lot of the same behaviors, and that would damage my social relationships. That would damage relationships with friends that I had, that just, well, stopped being friends because I wasn't aware at some point, you know, that I had all these like trauma and issues that I had to deal with. And like I'm being as brief as I can, right? But it gets deeper than this. Um, but anyway, you know, when I started realizing of all these things, you know, like progressively throughout the years, you know, I started to put in the work. And so, like I said, one of the things or the tools that I've used to process this, like I've mentioned, has been psychoactive substances. But besides psychoactive substances, I've also found help or found therapy to be helpful. I've been through several therapists throughout my life. All of them helped me in some way or another, but unfortunately, most of them weren't really that helpful. You know, they would just just temporarily they were helpful, but um, I mean that was it. The last therapist I used to go to was the only one I actually thought that was very good. He helped, well, not the last one, the two last therapists I visited. The one that diagnosed me, which is not only a therapist but a psychiatrist, and then another therapist I used to visit, which he is a psychologist, right? So both of them really helped me a lot, you know, and the psychologist really helped me to, you know, finish my healing. All of those things that I, you know, wouldn't have noticed uh, until later in my life, right? And it was because of him, like pointing those things out to me that I was able to work through them, like earlier on, and so it helped me, you know, finish my healing path. And honestly, I'm very thankful for him because he has been, well, like one of the most empathetic, understanding people that I've ever met. And as a therapist, you know, he just helped me a lot, like no one before him. And so yeah, the therapy helped me a lot. Throughout the years, I've also learned about psychology, you know, like individually, you know, like independently, I mean. You know, I'm very curious, like I said, so I tend to research a lot. And so I would research a lot of topics related to psychology, to the study of psychology and concepts and terminology and so on and so forth, right? So learning about it, you know, independently also helped me to gain like a better understanding of how the brain works at a psychological level, right? Eventually I started like being interested in learning like surface level neuroscience. That also helped me a lot to understand, you know, the physiological mechanisms of the body, and the nervous system, and how it plays, what role it plays into, one's behavior and health. So, learning about psychology and learning about neuroscience, like I said, like surface level. It's not like I became an expert on it or anything. I just took whatever seemed helpful from those fields and I applied them to my life, and it was really cool. It helped me a lot. It helped me a lot more than anything when it came to relationships and when it came to like friendships and romantic relationships, because I used to have very unhealthy, very unhealthy relationships. And so I went through, when it comes to friendships, I would really replicate a lot of the same behavior that my parents or my family would, you know, would show. When it came to romantic partners, um, it would get even worse, because my vulnerability led me to be a victim to emotional and sexual abuse, and so it was really hard to get through that. Um, but I mean, it's already in the past. I don't really think too much about it nowadays. Um, I've been able to get through it, to heal through that as well. But I guess I thought it was maybe relevant to mention that. Because, like I said, I mean, all of my experiences, like all of the things that I've been going through and all of the stuff that I've been encountering, it has led me to very undesirable places and to a lot of unfortunate situations, and like having a family with narcissistic tendencies has taken me to, be trapped in the nets of other narcissistic people, um, romantically, and at work as well, and so it has been a huge challenge for me to have to deal, with the internal aspect and with the social aspect, when it comes to boundaries and, like standing for myself, to other people. It has been difficult and it has been a challenge, but it has been something that I had to work through. Um, but yeah, besides, what else? What else? Learning about psychology, learning about neuroscience, substance use. Well, I've had to learn to integrate all the stuff that I've been learning and all the stuff, the experiences that I've been having. It's what they call shadow work. So it's really, since always, I am used to do a lot of inner reflection, about, my thoughts and my behavior and the things I want or the things I don't want to tolerate. And, like just a lot of reflection comes into this. So for me to be able to kind of really, dissect, my mind state, and to be able to take action that's helpful for me, that's healthy for me. I've also learned meditation. It was very difficult at first, honestly, you guys. It was very difficult learning meditation, because, we're used to our minds, like being on all the time, with these thoughts that never stop, so it was very frustrating at first, but, I decided to stick with it. With meditation, I learned breath work techniques and different meditation techniques that have helped me a ton throughout the years. And I do still meditate. It has become a like part of my life. So I do meditate daily, and it has been very helpful. Like, I do it for several reasons. One of those is like spiritual reasons, but you don't even have to believe in the spiritual stuff to benefit from meditation, because meditation helps your nervous system regulate, and so it is a very useful tool if what you're looking for is something to help, with that regulation. So some people use it for sleep as well, for example, which I don't really use meditation for sleep, but I mean, you can use it for sleep. It's also, I guess it can be helpful for that as well. Um, and yeah, walking, just movement, walking and dancing, has also helped me a lot, to just, so I'm not, I don't keep myself, like, well, inactive, because when one's inactive, it has an effect on us. It has an effect on us. It has an effect on our mind state, on how we feel, mentally, emotionally. And so, like, movement and physical activity is a very important thing that can help you in, like, dealing and, better handling, all of these things. So, like I said, I really like to walk a lot, and I like to dance a lot. That also helps. You don't have to. I mean, if you're into sports, there you go. But if you're not into sports, you can do like other light stuff as well, as long as you incorporate movement into your life. It helps a lot. Of course, try to have a healthy diet as much as you can. Um, Try to avoid processed foods as much as you can. I mean, you don't have to eliminate them from your life, but just reduce, the processed foods that you consume, and try to, eat healthier and drink healthier stuff. Try to reduce just whatever is not as healthy to consume. When it comes to drinks, with sugar drinks, for example, with alcohol, with foods that don't have as much like fat, that doesn't have food that doesn't have as much sugar, like, or just, I mean, I'm not a professional, I'm not a health professional or anything, right? But just eat healthier. Just eat healthier, drink more water. You know, that'll help as well a lot, because, well, a lot of times we tend to think, or we have been sold this idea that our bodies and our minds are separate things. They're not. They're not separate things. They're the same thing. They're the same thing. They're part of the same mechanism. They're part of the same system. And so one affects the other. It's not even a separate thing. It's just like, your inner world affects you emotionally, mentally, psychologically, right? And also physically, And so you really have to be aware of that, and you have to take care of those things as well. Like in an integral way, you know. Um, but yeah, I don't know, guys. I mean, I guess this is some of the stuff that I've been doing, that I've worked through. The stuff that I've applied that has helped me, in overcoming this. Honestly, it hasn't been easy. Like, more specifically now, when it comes to breaking patterns, I really took some drastic decisions these last months. I went through, since like during the last year, I've been going through some really tough situations. And so, like, everything just clustered into the same, like, season of my life. And so there was this guy at work who was gaslighting me, right? And he was painting me as a bad guy to the rest of his friends at work, which I don't really care that much about how they perceived me. It was more about the gaslighting itself, right? It was very shitty for him to do. And this guy, by the way, does like shady stuff. I learned eventually this guy does shady stuff with other people. So, very sketchy person. But anyway, so he was doing that. And then at the same time, I realized at home that my family was being emotionally abusive. I I didn't want to accept it, but I had to. I realized that they were using me for my money, for my time, for, just my abilities. They were taking from me. And it just became so consistent and, like so obvious to me that I, as time went by, I was feeling less and less comfortable, and I started to feel unsafe in my own home. And so it grew to the point where I just couldn't handle being there anymore. I just couldn't even sleep. I would totally feel unsafe. Sometimes they wouldn't even let me sleep, you know. Like I said, they would be very manipulative. Um, and so eventually I had to open my eyes and realize that, hey, like I know I try to be empathetic and I try to be nice, but these people are abusing of that. These people are abusing my empathy just to benefit out of it. They are not caring about how they affect me. It was just like I said, it's just covert narcissism. And so then I realized that the same thing, like my boss at work was doing the exact same thing, right? She would speak negatively of me, and not only of me, my other coworkers as well. She would speak very negatively of other coworkers as well, behind our backs, of course, because she didn't have the balls to be like that in front of us. But well, she would be like that. Um, I was told that she would even take credit for some of my initiatives. That was really shitty of her as well. She was very mean. She was also very manipulative. And it's kind of crazy because most of my coworkers already kind of knew that, right? They kind of already perceived that. They would actually tell me, they would point that to me, with she being that way. But I just didn't want to believe it. I guess that I just used to think that all people were really good and people really had good intentions in their hearts, and that everybody was as honest as me. And I was in for a big surprise. No, fortunately, that's not the norm. And so, like I said, like just like my family, my boss was also using a very covert, manipulative behavior with me. And so eventually I needed to, I had to realize, all of this stuff stuff that was happening around me. It was just like, okay, I'm a victim of narcissism at home. I'm a victim of narcissism at my job, by my own boss and by some other dude there, that, it's just like all of, I got, while I was having to deal with so much pressure from several people simultaneously, it was very difficult to get through, and through those periods I realized that a lot of these people didn't even, like, it was very obvious that they didn't really care about my well-being. It was really obvious that they didn't really have empathy for me, that they didn't really care about the difficulties that I had to get through, that to just, it was very obvious. It just became very obvious to me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't try to just uh, excuse them anymore, because it was very obvious that they just didn't care about it. Just didn't care about my well-being, right? And so well, besides this, I also got fired because the company had to just fire a lot of their employees because they lost a big client. And so they didn't have the money, they didn't have the resources to pay as many employees anymore. And so I was one of the lucky ones who got fired. And so imagine this, right? It's just like all this stuff going on in my life, like, during the same span of time. It was very difficult for me. And so I had to take some drastic decisions because I realized that I couldn't, I just couldn't continue down that path, allowing people to treat me that way and just repeating the same behaviors that were harmful, that I was allowing for them to happen. I just couldn't continue that way. And so I accepted, being fired. I didn't fight back. I was just like, okay, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna trust, that things are going to, things are gonna be okay, right? And I'm not gonna lie, it has been difficult. You know, there have been moments where it has been difficult for me to see clearly and to really even find the financial means to sustain myself and to pay, you know, for a place to stay or for food, because I haven't been able to find any other job. You know, I applied to some jobs, to some positions, and I just was declined. You know, I wasn't. I don't know. I guess the labor market. You know, I don't know how you refer to that. You know, you know, it's getting tough. That's what I'm gonna say, right? And so, you know, I've had issues with that I haven't been able to find a job. I've been having issues, you know, with when it comes to finances, because it's just like, I mean, like I say, you know, it's just like, to me, honestly, I'm living like day to day. You know, it's just like, I'm not even sure what's gonna happen tomorrow, right? But you know, I try to keep it, you know, as positive as I can, and I try to keep it as light as I can, and I try to really calm myself down, because otherwise, I mean, I gotta think clearly, you know, with rationally. And it's not that I don't worry, but worrying will, or allowing for that worry to take over me, will just make things worse. So I gotta really learn to, you know, navigate through the situations with the most appropriate character, you know, with the best way I can. Uh, um, but yeah, you know, so I've been going through that, and I also I left home, you know, one day. Actually, I got too ahead of myself, right? So before being fired, actually, right, I ran away from home, because, like I said, it just came to the point where I just couldn't even live there anymore. I just felt so unsafe, and I realized that my family, my mother, more than any of the rest of my family, was keeping me psychologically vulnerable. And like I said, you know, that was taking me, you know, was being an easy target for a lot of other people. And you know, I've gone through some situations that almost got me killed. And so I realized that, oh my God, I was just like, no, no, I can't keep on living in the same house with the same people. You know, it doesn't matter if I actually feel any kind of love for them, but they are unhealthy for me. And they are keeping me vulnerable, and that is affecting my life, and that is taking me to situations and experiences that are attempting against my life. And I can't keep for that to I can keep allowing for that to continue, right? And so I ran away. Like literally one day I just went out to work. I took my bag, didn't even bother, you know, packing anything particularly. I just took my bag with the usual stuff I would take to work, and I just didn't went back. Just didn't went back again. I texted them and I called them. Well, they called me. I texted them to tell them that I wasn't going back. Because you know, during the days prior to that, to me running away, I actually told them. You know, like I remember I even texted him. We had like a family group chat, and so I told them that that I realized that what they were doing, that they were being manipulative with me, and that they really had to cut it off, and they needed to start being respectful. And so, of course, they denied it. They denied it. They made it seem like, oh, what are you talking about? You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. We just care about you. We just want to help you. You know, these usual manipulative tactics that, you know, I was able to see through it. They were denying everything, obviously, like a really good covert narcissist would. Just deny everything, deny responsibility. And so they would actually, I remember, they started, you know, during those days harassing me with text messages and with calls. And when I was at home, you know, they wouldn't even allow me to sleep. I was just being in this constant noise, you know, that I was just like, oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, they want to keep me vulnerable. All this thing they're doing isn't helping. You know, I was asking them, like, respectfully to please just give me some space, and they didn't even could respect that. They didn't even respect that, right? They would just harass me through calls and through texts. And I was just like, these people really don't care about me. They clearly don't care about me. And so, like I said, after a few days, I went to work. I went out to work, and I didn't return. I didn't went back, and it was very difficult. Honestly, it was very tough. It has been like probably the most, uh, the hardest day or the hardest evening of my life. It was just like having to face that, that I wasn't safe at home, that they didn't care about me, like they made it seem like it was all an illusion. It was all a show just to keep me distracted and to keep being complacent. It felt really horrible to get through that, right? And it was very difficult because I was really scared and I was really afraid because I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have any friend that would just, reply back to me. Like, I actually remember, I did text a few friends. None of them replied back to me at that specific moment. None of them would answer me. And so I kind of realized that, oh my God, I think I'm more lonely than I thought, right? Because not even my friends are, well, the ones I called, not even them are taking my calls. And so I stayed at a hotel. Well, I had enough money to pay for a hotel for, I think I was out there like for 2 or 3 nights. It was really overwhelming. It was really difficult, honestly, you guys, but I knew that it was for the best. It was one of the hardest, if not the hardest decision that I've had to make in my life, because I was just like, I knew that I was leaving all of my material belongings behind. I was leaving all that I knew behind. I was leaving comfort behind. I was leaving my family behind. And I just didn't have any more kind of material stability anymore, and it was very scary. It was very overwhelming. But I knew I had to get through it. I knew that I had to start taking more care of myself and stop being so complacent, because being so complacent was putting my life at risk in situations that were just making me more vulnerable to predators, right? So, I mean, I just knew that if I loved myself, I love myself, right? And I realized that I was like self-abandoning, and it was very difficult to accept that I was abandoning myself, like I just didn't realize that until very late. And so doing this was very difficult, and I put myself in very difficult situations, but I know that it was the right thing to do, because it has allowed me to unravel, a lot of psychological traps that I had fallen into, due to like other people's manipulation tactics on me, right? So this has helped me, like really this has helped me to be more aware of things. This has helped me integrate so much more into my life. This has made me realize of how important I am, and the fact that I should have been treating myself with more respect and with more kindness, and stop excusing so much others, because I was putting others' comfort over my own health and over my own stability and over, my own well-being. And so I've had to get through this. I've had to deal through this stuff. And it has been a total challenge, you guys. Like, because imagine that, like it's just like I went through all this stuff that I just mentioned, right? And then I had to run away from home. I didn't have enough money. I was able to afford a hotel, like I said, for a few days. So thankfully I had enough for those days. a friend helped me out, and he allowed me to stay at his place like for a little, like over a month and a half, I kind of think, or a little less than 2 months. So he allowed me to stay with him, but eventually he asked me to leave. Um, as time went by, I realized, that a lot of the friends that I actually thought were my friends, and I'm not even talking about him, I'm talking about other people. But, a lot of the people that I thought were my friends weren't actually real friends, because they didn't show up for me when I needed it. They, a few of them, when I told them that I was in the streets, that I didn't have anywhere to go, they didn't even allow me to stay at their place. Not even for a night, right? And so, I was just like, fuck, man. I try to be there for people. I try to be nice. I try to be helpful. And a lot of them just wouldn't reciprocate when I needed it the most, right? And so I had to open my eyes, and realize that, oh my God, all of these people are using me for their own benefit and for their own gain, and they don't really give a fuck about me, or about me, about my, my integrity or my well-being, right? Not even these so-called friends. And so, like I said, some of them did show up. Thankfully, some of them did show up, so they were able to help me in whatever way they could, some with words and support. Some of them have helped me financially. They have loaned me some money that I've used, to pay for a place to stay and to have food, to buy food. But yeah, it has been very difficult, because yes, like I said, I ran away, and then this friend, allowed me to stay at his place, but eventually he wanted his space back. And honestly, I get it. He wanted his privacy, and he was giving up that privacy, just to help me out. And it came to the point where I realized that I just had to leave. And that like I said, I was more alone than I thought, or lonelier than I thought, right? Not alone, but lonelier. And so I just bought a flight ticket, and I came to another city, where here it's more, I like I like it here better than where I was living back then. The air, the whole atmosphere, it's just more relaxed over here. It's more like, I just feel more comfortable. I just feel freer. I just feel lighter being here. And so it was a good call to come here, and to be here, because I've been able to have a more decent life, more peaceful. Maybe not decent, but more peaceful life. It's still going on. It's still something that I'm getting through. This situation that I'm dealing with, financially. But yeah, I just knew that I had to leave everything behind. I wasn't being hired at any job that I applied to. I left my family's home. I had to leave my friend's place because, well, he wasn't comfortable, and I wasn't comfortable either. And so I took, the clothes and the few books that I had, and I took the flight. Literally, I bought the flight ticket, and I flew over here, just within hours of me buying that ticket. And being here, it has helped me a lot, in clearing my mind, in doing things that I like doing. I've been like reconnecting with myself, and I've been like doing stuff that I like doing, that I enjoy doing, that I had forgotten to do, because of other things, because of other responsibilities that I took from other people, right? And so I've been able to, to reconnect with myself. And that has been really a good thing for me to do, I'm not worrying as much as I used to. I'm not having as much um, overwhelmed from other people as I used to, right? Because now I feel just more freer, more calm. I learned to reinforce my boundaries just with everybody, and I had to learn to make better decisions for myself, right? And to, improve my character and just improve overall, improve and become a better person for myself, and to, take better life decisions, and to, like is to break patterns and to break the cycles I didn't want to keep on repeating because they were unhealthy. They were not okay. Just because it's the norm, it doesn't make it okay, you guys. It doesn't make it all right. That excuse that some people use, that I've heard so many times, where people are like, don't expect empathy from others, right? Because life is like that, and life is hard, and I'm like, so what? So what if life is hard? That doesn't give you any excuse to be an asshole with other people. Just the fact that life is hard, and just the fact that it's a normal thing, or that it has been normalized to be shitty to others, doesn't make it all right. And it's not an excuse for people to behave that way. But anyway, you guys, like I said, it has been difficult, but I've been getting through this, and I trust that, you know, things will unfold in a more positive way in the future. You know, I just gotta keep putting in the effort. Well, not even the effort, but it's more the awareness, really, the awareness of how I use my time and what kind of decisions I make and how I use my resources, and but it's doable. It's doable. It's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do. I'm not gonna lie to you, but it's doable. And I mean, it was time. It was time. I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't want to keep perpetuating the same cycles anymore. And so I'm just, seeing life from a totally different perspective, and just learning to live in a healthier way. Like I said, it has been a learning curve, totally, because just from having a very comfortable life to having almost nothing, to having no sense of stability. It's not an easy task. It's it's possible. It's possible. Of course, I also gotta be very thankful for the opportunities that I've had, the people that I've crossed paths with, that have been helpful, that have helped me, in some way or another. The resources that I've encountered, even if it's not much, I really appreciate it, and I'm thankful for all that I currently have, and well, I guess this video is not really about faith or anything like that, but well, relying on God has been, if not one of the most important things, probably the most important thing for me to be able to get through all of this. But well, like I said, it's just better to be optimistic, to be positive, to think rationally, but also, to rely more on my intuition, and to have a better balance overall, to have a better balance of who I am, and the kinds of decisions that I make, and what kinds of things I allow for other people to do, when it comes to my relationships, and my relationships with them. But yeah, you guys, I don't know. I guess I try to keep it as brief as I could. I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments, or you would like me to talk about something else related to this, or I don't know, whatever you want to ask, or you want to contribute. Maybe you have something to contribute for others to see. Well, please use the comment section. I really hope this video has been helpful to you. That's the reason I'm doing this. I just want to post this, mm, trusting that the right people will find this and it would be helpful for whoever can get some um, positive use out of it. So thanks for watching, and I guess I'll see you around.